Hi everyone, welcome to the next session in the Teacher, Technician and Advisor workshop series. Thank you to everyone who attended our Fashion Forms workshop yesterday. We've had lots of photos through on Instagram, which have been lovely to see. But if you haven't already, do send those across to us and we'll be sharing those online as they come in. But welcome to today's session. I'll be handing over very shortly to Ben, who will be leading the workshop for you. Firstly, just some housekeeping bits before we get going. For the majority of this presentation, we will be asking you to keep your video and your audio off, just so it makes things run as smoothly as possible for Ben as he's going through the presentation. As we get on to the more interactive element of the workshop, we will, as we have been doing, asking you to share your work and kind of talk to us about how you've got to where you are. And at that point, if you could let us know in the chat, and then we'll facilitate you sharing your audio and video. We will also be recording today's session. At the moment, we're kind of looking at around a week for the recordings to be sent out to you, just because it does take us quite a little bit of time just to kind of download them, convert them and get them up onto YouTube before we're able to send a link to you. But please rest assured we will be sending these out to you. We just ask that you be a little bit patient with us while we're working on those. And then for people that haven't joined before, just to introduce myself, my name is Liv and I work in the recruitment and outreach team. We are aware that many of your students will be feeling uncertain and anxious during this time, so we will put a link to our FAQs about how the NUA community is approaching the situation with COVID-19. I think that's most of the things from me. Also, just to say, if you have questions, do pop them in the chat as you have been doing. The chat will be open and I'll be on hand to deal with those, and we can put your questions to Ben throughout the session and at the end as well. But otherwise, I'll hand over to Ben and we'll get going. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Liv. So my name is Ben Salter. I'm the course leader for the Interior Design Department at NUA. And today's very short, very condensed workshop is going to be around creative confidence. So we're going to take a look at what we do differently and a bit of kind of theory about design thinking. We're going to look at some practical examples of what we do at NUA. So hopefully some takeaway ideas that you might be able to use in the classrooms. And we'll look at, towards the end, a kind of slightly more interactive part of the presentation at actually having a go at creating some interesting, shall we say, and unique design solutions. So my background is actually in scenography, which is set design. It's sort of fake interior design, if you like. It's interior design with less of the hard work. But it's really about how people make a connection with space and how space is used as a narrative element. My current research areas are around design emotion and kind of domestic technologies, and the way that seems very appropriate for today, the way that technology is shaping or reshaping the domestic landscape. And my professional practice is in and around exhibition design and temporary design. So you can see a few things on screen. This was a working from home studio, which seems very appropriate. And some of my research interests, like I said, which are around kind of domestic technologies and the way that that's changing our residential landscape. So we'll start off just looking at the kind of wider contexts of design and what I would like to hope is going to be a really important part of today's presentation, looking at the kind of creative industries as a whole. So obviously we are NUA, we are a specialist arts institution, and that gives us a distinct advantage because every aspect of our curriculum, every aspect of our physical campus and our online teaching is specifically set up for kind of creative processes and creative practice. We cover a wide variety of subjects, but obviously the most important part for me is design, and I'll go on to talk a little bit about how that works within the creative industries in a second. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this chap, some very entertaining TED Talks, and I think Liv's got some links that she'll put into the group chat so that you can follow these up. But Sir Ken Robinson has, well, some quite controversial views on education and how creativity really is an integral part of everything that we do. So it's not a separate faculty. It's not something that people have or don't have. It's really a kind of underlying principle in the way that we kind of understand the world, the way that we conceptualize things. And we do that every day. It might be crossing the road and trying to predict when the traffic is going to come. So the key thing the key takeaway from this slide really is that creativity is really the engine of our economy. Sorry, these statistics are a little bit old now, and I think this has increased even more so. But it is really the driving factor now that we've moved out of a manufacturing and then a kind of service industry-based economy to now a kind of creative economy. And you can see down the bottom, between architecture and crafts is design and fashion, which accounts for £3.9 billion of revenue every year. And interiors really sits right in the middle of that. And we sit quite comfortably, if you like, in the middle of the kind of the three-dimensional kind of creative industries. So interior design really is a kind of confluence of three main factors. And if anybody's ever sat through one of my open day presentations, you'll probably recognize some of these slides, but it's really about, in the first instance, people. It's about understanding people. It's about understanding what people's needs and wants, and in some cases fears are. But it's also a confluence of things like technology. And I don't just mean the technology that we're all using today. It's not just sort of screens and IT. It's really about the kind of built environment, about what we can actually build and what we can realize. And obviously the other part of that is that it's a business, and we need to be able to make money off of it. We need to be able to use kind of creative endeavors in a productive and practical way. So there's lots of different things that come in to influence what interior design is as a subject. And like I said, we sit right in the middle between things like the large scale stuff, architecture and urban planning, and the small scale stuff like product design, things like furniture even. So as interior designers, we have to kind of be aware of all of these different things. And there are kind of very recognizable career pathways around these. So all the bits in white are kind of recognized, if you like, subgenres of interior design. And there's my background at the top, which is design fiction, which is commonly referred to as scenography, so set design, that sort of thing. And again, if you've sat through any of my open day presentations, we go into these in a bit more detail and we start to pick them apart, because I think most people's preconceptions about interior design is just residential design. It's just homes and apartments and that sort of thing. So the ways that we try to encourage creative confidence at NUA are very much a kind of underlying principle, a kind of core belief, if you like, in terms of design thinking. This is a guy that you might not be familiar with, a chap called Tim Brown, who's the CEO of a company called IDEO. You probably have some of Tim's designs in your house and not ever realized it, but Tim's been a kind of really influential figure in terms of not just product design, but a lot of service design. And he's worked across everything from healthcare to toilet seats. It's an amazing journey. But and you probably noticed that the Venn diagram in the bottom left-hand corner is very similar to my diagram of where the interior design kind of influences come from. But really, design thinking is about turning problems into questions and exploring those questions in a creative way. So this is a diagram from the IDEO website that kind of breaks it down a little further, but it's hopefully something that's fairly recognizable, because this is a kind of very cool, a very similar kind of process to the experiential learning theory, which is the kind of the key principle that we use at NUA. So the ELT, and this is a great diagram, but the experiential learning cycle was kind of proposed a really long time ago by a chap called David Kolb back in 1984. And it's about how we learn best, how we learn through experiences, how we reflect on those experiences, and then hopefully what is the really fun part, how we kind of start to conceptualize those. And for NUA, that's obviously part of our artistic process. And then how we experiment, how we test those ideas out. So design thinking is a kind of core belief, and the experiential learning cycle is that kind of process of learning through doing, and a really big part of that is kind of reflecting on what you do. This is a photo from this year's Welcome Week, actually. So this was essentially week 0, and we're already getting the students to design, to make, and that's a really important part of our studio culture. It's it's a studio. It's not a waiting room. It's a very much a kind of active environment. So concrete experiences are the kind of, and it's not a linear process. And we'd like to think that the students go through this process multiple iterations. Are really experiences that reinterpret your kind of existing experience, your existing understanding. Really big part of that is reflecting, is understanding what you've done and kind of why you've done it. And a core principle across all of the courses at NUA is a kind of reflective journal. It's kind of a logbook, and it takes various forms in across the courses. It might be sketchbooking, it might be blogging, but it's that element of reflection and kind of critical thinking which is really important. And then the fun bit, for me anyway, is the kind of abstract conceptualization. It's the creative process. And that's really where we're looking to kind of form new ideas. And rather than just reinterpret what we know and what we see around us, but look for new connections and forge new ideas. And then to experiment with that, well, that's quite difficult for us, because obviously we can't just go and build spaces and see what they feel like. But the best way to do that, and hopefully you'll see some examples on the NUA website, is things like model making. So scale representations of those spaces. But obviously, you know, there's other things that will help kind of visualize that. So things like computer-aided design is a really big part of what we do and what industry expects us to be able to do. Okay, so design thinking really is about encouraging that creative confidence, encouraging that ability to test out your ideas and play with things. And I'd like to think that we go through this process enough times that the students don't even know they're doing it. It's purely kind of instinctive at that point. So I've got a couple of examples that we use that you might be able to use, or there might be kind of alternatives. So that active understanding, that experience, that lived understanding is a really big part. Whenever we can, we like to try and get out on site, and one of the things that we do a lot when we're working with real clients and live projects is a dimension survey. So that's an inherently collaborative exercise. It's not something that you can do on your own. So it requires that kind of collaboration and communication. So you can see a couple of students here with a measuring tape. It's quite a traditional way to do it. There are lots of very cool, funky gadgets for doing this very quickly, but it's almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's very difficult to do this on your own. Other alternatives that would kind of help that lived experience might be things like role play. So especially if we're working with a difficult or vulnerable user group, then when we can't interact directly with the clients, then role play can be a really good way to understand a space or a process or a set of activities. Observation is a really key analytical skill. This is an example of a big timeline drawing. This is actually drawn on a piece of lining paper. It's a very cheap, fun way to get students engaged and interpreting that kind of research finding. So it forces them to look differently at how they kind of conceptualize that information. And looking back at a historical study with something like a timeline, it can be quite an abstract process, really. But in this case, the students are using a big, long measuring tape to actually map out years. So each year is a centimetre, and they're going through a series of design movements. one of the key things really here is about making big things with big gestures. So what you won't find is a lot of time sitting at a desk. What you will find is that students will be occupying the space in lots of different ways. But really that freedom of movement is a really important aspect. And I'll explore that a little bit more later on in the presentation. But literally, freedom of movement is freedom of thinking. And then conceptualization. So like I said, this is probably the most fun part, and you'll see in the work that the students produce, there's still a lot of very traditional processes. There's still lots of drawing, there's painting, there's making going on. And that process of doing is really important. So what the students are doing here is a mood and message board. As you can see, it's huge. It's on a big A0 plus piece of paper, and everybody's drawing into the same image. So this is actually a site analysis of our local library. But working on a shared drawing can really boost kind of confidence and aid participation. Even if students don't feel confident with a particular type of drawing, and drawing people is probably one of the most difficult, there's always some aspect of that. It might simply be labels and annotation, but people can get involved in. But that, like I said, that abstract conceptualization of experiences is a really important part of how we forge new ideas and find kind of creative opportunities. And experimentation, so how we test those ideas out. It's, again, really encouraging when we see students seeking feedback from not just us, but from their peers. So anything really that you can do to kind of encourage that kind of peer collaboration, and it might be group work, or it might be something like a critique, like a pin-up, where students are feeding back on each other's work, is a really important part of them finding that independence and confidence. But obviously that emulates a lot of what we would expect the students to be able to do out in industry. So working in teams really builds that studio culture of hopefully a place where the students want to be, and not just a place where they have to do work. Okay, so like I said, that's a kind of general kind of overview of what we do at NUA, and hopefully the photos give you a little insight into sort of activities that we do in the studio, and hopefully a few takeaway ideas that you can maybe apply with your students. So the main goal of all of these activities is to get the students feeling comfortable, get them feeling happy with each other. If you feel confident and happy, then generally your ideas tend to be bigger, tend to be broader, and more conceptual. And you don't necessarily feel that fear of failure as generally. When I use that term very loosely, that fear of failure, because actually failing is a really important part of the design process. Your ideas aren't always going to work. And I think, well, I would say that I probably learn a lot more from when things go wrong than when things go right. So a little bit more context. The idea of getting the students out of their seats and working on big things and doing big expressive drawings is kind of underpinned by a little bit of social psychology. But this is a lady that you might all be familiar with. This is a lady called Amy Cuddy, and she's a social psychologist. Sorry, it's a bit of a tongue twister. And her research is really based on how we use body language. Body language is obviously a kind of non-verbal communication form of expression, but it can kind of flip that on its head, and you can use body language and gestures to change the way that you're feeling, change the way that you're thinking. So this is the most famous, which is the kind of the Wonder Woman pose with your hands on your hips. And it's really about using expansive gestures to help people feel more confident. So there's two very distinct kind of approaches to this. There's kind of high power poses, which generally imply high testosterone. And you've probably all seen this with, I don't know, like footballers or sports personalities or the Olympics. People, you know, when they win, they put their hands up in that V shape. And it really is that kind of occupying a space, making yourself bigger. And these aren't just kind of psychological kind of tendencies that humans have. We see this sort of every day in the animal kingdom as well. And then obviously the serious side of this is low power poses, which generally imply a high level of cholesterol, cortisol, sorry. And that I see, sadly, more often than not in students. So it might be things like hiding your pockets. The kind of contemporary equivalent that we see a lot of these days is retreating into a phone. That generally tends to be a safe space, but generally the idea is that you're making yourself smaller to protect yourself. You're protecting the most kind of important parts of your body. This is a principle that one of our students used in her final major project. This is the work of Rebecca Addison. You might have seen this last year in the degree show. So there's a lot of visual information, obviously, but there's some site analysis and user group studies, and then a little bit about the theory of how she was intending to change people's postures by using a ginormous, great big staircase, essentially, to force people to start to lift their head and to look upwards. And the idea of this space was it was a sort of a retreat, a sort of sanctuary space within a very busy city. So you can see here the kind of concept visuals, which are a series of models, soft models, based around the location as a site foam board model. And these are the kind of the final renders and the final visualizations of the space. So you can see it's a big sort of amorphous cloud, and the main feature of that was a light, responsive lighting feature that literally breathed and could sense the people that were in the space. Okay, fab. So that leads us on nicely to the kind of final part of the workshop for today, which is the more interactive bit. And that's really a kind of snapshot of the very early stages of the teaching in the first year. So we're going to try and create something interesting and unique, hopefully with a sense of confidence in what you're doing. And this really is about trying to approach design thinking from a kind of deeper perspective and encourage creative confidence. So it's the most difficult thing, especially for new students, to make that leap. Coming up with new ideas are risky, you know. Creative ideas, creative risks often fail. But embracing that kind of process and not fearing failure is really important. So we're going to look at some basic principles, and this will be slightly interactive. So there will be a chance for you to feedback through the group chat, but we'll look at some form giving techniques. So how we imply feeling and emotion through shapes. And then we'll look at hopefully reducing a little bit of fear with a bit of design work that's, yeah, how shall I say? So it's not up to you. So form giving is the kind of general term that we use when we talk about actually giving an idea some shape, some substance. And that's really important to try and get away from what things just look like, because it's very easy to make something pretty that just exists in a picture or on a screen, but it's very difficult to make something that actually will make somebody feel something. So that really is kind of tied up in the quality of these shapes. So we're going to be using abstraction as a kind of key design methodology, and we're going to be designing a chair completely by chance, and hopefully without any fear, because you won't be responsible, if you like, for the kind of outcome of the design. That'll be purely by chance. So there's a good chance it'll look ugly. So don't worry about it. If you can't come up with something beautiful, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So quick little warm-up exercise, just so that we can start to look at the kind of process. I'd like you to have a go at drawing 3 circles. So just on a bit of paper, it doesn't have to be perfect. But if everybody could have a go at drawing 3 circles, that'd be great. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. I personally prefer a nice big biro, nice and easy, cheap, disposable, but very immediate. See a lot of students these days drawing little scratchy lines, and I think it's always good if you can get them to draw as big as possible. So unfortunately, I'm a bit limited for space, but I will try and re-angle my camera later on. So you can see what I'm doing. Okay, cool. So let's have a look and see. How many of you have got 3 circles that look something like that? Or, oh, excellent. Or 3 circles that look like that? Oh, there we go. There we've got a winner. Or 3 circles that look something like that. Okay, well, there's no right or wrong way. You know, I gave you a very loose brief at the end of the day. There wasn't a lot of information in that, but the fact that I asked you to draw 3 circles is kind of starts to imply that those 3 objects might be the same, depending on your your level of drawing ability. But yeah, nobody drew the Venn diagram, which is a shame. That's always my favorite. It's slightly more dynamic, but yeah, the idea is that there's 3 circles. The 3 circles have some sort of relationship, and the way that you've drawn that starts to imply what that might mean about those circles and how they interact. So if I was to ask you, and it's going to be very difficult for people to respond to this one. Sorry, this usually works a lot better in person. What is the relationship between these 3 shapes? And it's not a trick question. They are all exactly the same. I haven't done anything weird by kind of changing the size or proportion, which is usually what most of the kind of students in the workshop would ask me. So what can we see in this image? And it is very simple line drawing that starts to give us an idea about the relationship of these shapes and how they interact. The spaces between them, yeah, they are all the same. People do normally get up out of their seats and sort of peer a little bit harder at the projectors to see if I've done anything sneaky. And they're all upright. Well, it kind of depends what you mean by upright. I suppose the fact that, or the most kind of telling thing about this is that I've kind of arranged them all along the same horizontal line at the bottom. So that starts to imply that there's a base, there's a surface or something that they're all sitting on. That makes them all uniform. So even from that very simple line drawing, we can start 1 standing, 2 standing and 1 laying down. Yeah, I have had it in the past where people have said, well, one's been pushed over, which is kind of nice. But yeah, what it really starts to tell us is that we understand, or we make that kind of conceptual understanding, that leap, by what we know already in the natural world. So if we see 3 objects like that, it kind of implies that there is a surface, there's gravity, and that they're all sitting on a single plane. Okay, fab. So another quick question, and you might have seen this if you're an avid QI watcher, but what do we see in these shapes? Okay, one of them is called a booba, and another one is called a kiki. Okay, I just want you to write in the comments which one you think is which. Is A or B the booba, or which one's the kiki? Oh, and now it's flooding in. Okay, quite controversial. Okay, now it's starting to level out. Okay, so most people are saying A is the kiki. Which is kind of what most people would say. Probably about 95% of the population would agree with that. And I think it's a really interesting technique. It's or principle. It's a kind of phenomenon that's called onomatopoeia, and it's basically how we make the link between the language that we use to describe something and the kind of the characteristics of that shape in this case. So if you think about it, you may have already done it when you were trying to ask yourself that question. But if you say it out loud, or if you mouth it silently, you can start to kind of imply the qualities of that shape. So a kiki is a very sharp and spiky sounding shape. A booba is a much more kind of rounded, hopefully softer and more organic shape. And it even kind of manifests itself in the way that your mouth moves to make those shapes. Okay, so one more quick question. What do we see in these shapes? This is a really bad, horrible sketch of a circle, not much of a circle, I'm afraid. But if we compare it to this circle, there's quite a lot of difference. Well, one's not a circle, one's a triangle, very badly drawn triangle, with some little wiggly lines. Or this triangle, which is a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more dynamic looking. And finally, this sort of oval shape. So my next question really is, which of these shapes would you say looks the happiest? If we were going to try and imbue an emotion in these shapes. So A to D, just in the comments, which one would you say looks the most kind of happy and kind of joyous shape? Okay, most people saying B. Somebody saying C. I don't know about C, if I'm completely honest. C one kind of makes me think of the Joker's kind of grimace smile thing. I mean, that's maybe just me because I watched the film recently, but yeah, I think most people are kind of, most people are saying B. Oh, there's a couple of Ds. Okay, so again, you know, a lot of these kind of visual metaphors are kind of wrapped up in our kind of shared kind of cultural heritage. Most of us have read comic books at some point in our lives. The little wiggly lines around the shape start to imply a sense of movement, sense of motion. For me, I would say probably D, because it looks more animated. It looks like it's jumping up, but yeah, I think the consensus is B today by the look of things, which is great. I mean, that's obviously looking like a big teethy grin, a big smile. Okay, so what we're going to have a go at is designing this chair purely by chance. And the idea behind this is that we're going to try and develop some creative confidence, try and imbue some creative confidence by removing fear. Okay, fear is kind of the most universal kind of human characteristic. It comes from a fear of failure or a fear of critique by our peers. But generally, you don't need to worry about it today because you're not in control of what this thing looks like or how it potentially works. It is probably going to look quite weird and ugly. Okay, so we are going to need a dice at this point. So if you've got a dice to hand, that's fab. If not, don't worry. We are going to provide a link in the description so you can jump onto Google. But there's going to be a couple of steps to this. Okay, so the first step is going to be a kind of an emotion. That emotion will be the kind of theme for your chair. So we want to, like we just done, we want to try and imbue your forms, and we'll start off just with some very simple line drawings with some shapes that hopefully have an emotional kind of response. Then we'll look at the kind of location where your the context, if you like, for your chair, and the final step will be the actual criteria of how the chair will function. Okay, so is everybody ready? Has everybody got either a dice to hand? I've got one I've managed to find in a board game, and Liv's posted a link to a website, a random number generator, where you can roll a dice. Okay, cool. Is everybody ready? Okay, let's crack on. Okay, so the first thing is your emotion. So I want you to be honest and fair. So if you're working with anybody in the room, don't let anybody cheat. It's very easy. I see it a lot when people keep rolling the dice to get the emotion that they want. But yeah, literally 1 to 6 will give you your emotion. So, okay, I've got a 2, which is love. And I'm sure you didn't need the descriptions, but just in case, what I suggest you do is you make a note of the emotion that you've got. Step 2 is going to be another roll of the dice to figure out where your chair is going to be situated. So, okay, I've got number 1, which is a kitchen. Just a couple of fun facts whilst everybody's rolling their dice. I'm sure you're all familiar with all of these spaces. Okay, and then the final step is the actual criteria for the chair. So you're going to need to roll the dice 4 times, and this will tell you, first time, how many seats this needs to have. So I've got 4 seats. How many legs you've got? I've got 1 leg. It's going to be a very ugly chair. And then the other criteria is odds and evens to tell you whether the chair has a back or whether the chair has arms. So I've got arms. And a back. Okay, cool. So we'll give everybody a couple of minutes to start sketching. What I would say is that there is really no right or wrong answer. Try, like I said, try and think about how you can imbue an emotion in that chair. Okay, so not just how it looks, but how you can make somebody feel that emotion whilst they're sitting in the chair. This is an example of a fear chair. I think most people would associate things like
Sorry
spiders.
to interrupt. We've had a couple of people in the chat just ask if you could go back to the criteria.
Okay. Yep.
A little bit more time. So maybe if you could go right back. I think someone got lost at the second criteria. So if you could just quickly go through them again, that would be great.
Of course, no worries. So yeah, the first one is your emotional response. And those are, you know, very general emotions. I think they're probably very common, and we've all felt one of those or some of those at some point recently. The second step is the location. Okay, so you roll the dice again. That will tell you where that needs to be. Okay, it's not necessarily going to kind of make or break the design, but it will hopefully help you start to contextualize what that thing might need to do. So that might range from kind of residential places to institutions to being completely outdoors, although that might end up breaking the kind of social distancing rules. And then the final step of the criteria is how it's actually going to fulfill that. Okay, so the requirements of the seat and how it will function as a seat. So the first roll of the dice will literally tell you how many seats it has from 1 to 6. The second roll of the dice will tell you how many legs it needs to have from 1 to 6. And then the last 2 questions really are odds and evens. So if the chair has a back or if the chair has arms. So if it's odd, yes, it does. And if it's even, no, it doesn't. Okay, cool. So hopefully everybody's I'm trying to think, what am I waiting for? Waiting for a thumbs up now. Hopefully that's enough time for everybody to get the criteria for their chair.
I'll also pop them in the chat as well. I'm just typing them out for everyone.
Okay, fab. Thank you, Liv. Okay, great. And then we'll give you 10 minutes or so to start sketching and start drawing. So what I would say is that the best place to start isn't by designing a chair. Just start with your emotion. Start with the very basic form studies. Okay, so a simple line drawing of the kind of shapes that you think kind of imbue that emotional characteristic. Okay, it doesn't have to necessarily be recognizable. It just needs to have, it just needs to be relatable to you and your experiences, your understanding of that emotion. Okay, the next part is to start to think about how you can use that shape and that form to really not just make something that looks like that or has that kind of quality, but will maybe make somebody feel that particular emotion. Okay, so this chair is it's a pretty ugly chair, but it's a great example of a chair that would hopefully imbue fear in somebody. So the idea of this is that, yeah, it looks kind of animalistic and kind of aggressive, but also if you were to sit in that chair, you would have to climb up the leg, so a leg that was potentially about, I don't know, nearly 2 meters high off the ground. without any kind of handrail or handholds. So you have to kind of precariously climb up that thing and then kind of perch on top of it. This example, which is about love, is a slightly more interesting metaphor. So the idea of this chair is that, and these are all student examples. The idea of this chair is that it only really works when it comes together with other chairs. So in its own right, it functions as a chair, but then when you put it together as a bench seat, and I just realized that bench seat's got 3 seats, so it's quite an unconventional approach to love, but it's obviously using quite a commonly understood metaphor, an icon to represent that idea of love, the heart shape. This is a slightly more, much more sophisticated example of an outcome, and this is actually 2 different emotional responses. So this chair is designed to make somebody feel shameful when they're using it, and mildness. So when we do this in person, there's emotions to choose from, because it's not entirely down to a roll of a dice. But yeah, the idea behind this making you feel shameful is that you have to sit kind of open-legged on a very kind of uneven surface. So it's very unstable, and you're kind of putting yourself in a very vulnerable position. Whereas if you flip it on its back, it becomes much more like a lounge chair, and much more mild and calm, and a relaxing object to use. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick go at sketching out my rather odd love seat for a kitchen, and I'll do my best to make sure that you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm afraid I can't angle my my laptop so that you can actually see the desk, but then it would be upside down anyway. So I will very quickly sketch through this love seat, and I'll use some of the examples that we've been talking about today. So probably quite a complex emotion to try and realize in how long have we got to live. We've got a few minutes left to try and sketch out some ideas.
You've got at least 15 minutes. Sorry, I was busy sketching my own chair.
Excellent. Oh, you've hidden your screen. That's not fair. I'm going to try and find something that I can actually show on screen without feeling completely ridiculed. I'm not entirely convinced that that's completely appropriate. I'm assuming we're all adults in the room. Okay, I really should have found some nice relaxing music to put on in the background whilst we were doing this. These aren't pre-recorded squeaks. This is me frantically trying to sketch something out. And this is probably saying a lot more about my personality than I really need it to be honest. So in the past, when I've had the luxury of doing this across a whole morning with students, we've been able to make concept models and maquettes, which have been really fun, just out of soft sort of studio modeling materials or even found objects. And we do go through some practical exercises about how to really show that the idea of body language can have a huge effect on your ability to think and ability to create conceptual and interesting ideas. One of them involves getting the teachers to lie down on the floor and get shouted at, which is always fun. Okay. So my rather crude series of sketches for my interpretation of love looks something like that, which is a kind of very odd combination. Like I said, this probably says way too much about my personality, my experiences of love. But yeah, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of round, blobby, soft, comfortable shapes and rather spiky, aggressive things. I think I'm probably going to end up going with something along this line where the kind of the blobby shape is sitting on top of the spiky shapes. And now I need to try and think about how I can get this and the rest of my design criteria, which is I've got a 4-seater to try and come up with. It's only got 1 legs. It's got arms and a back. Slightly different pen. One of the great things that we use a lot, we borrow a lot of processes and a lot of design development techniques from things like product design, not just architecture. But one of the tools that's really useful is things like layout paper. Layout paper, if you haven't used it before, it's a bit like tracing paper, but it's completely white. So it's very easy to draw over and use as an underlay to keep drawing, keep refining your drawings. I wish I had some today, to be honest. And it works a bit like, well, it's just like tracing paper, but it's white, so that it means that you can scan it in afterwards and you can start to use it much more easily than you would with tracing paper in something like a presentation board. We use it a lot, not just for kind of ideation sketching, but for things like scale drawing. So when the students are drafting, and we still do a lot of very traditional drafting techniques, it can be a great tool for refining your drawings very quickly and easily. Okay. And another great tool that we use a lot of is underlays. So particularly for this drawing exercise, there would be some underlays of people. I don't know about you guys, but drawing people is the most difficult thing. Most of my people end up being a kind of triangle with a dot floating above. Okay. How are we doing for time, Liv?
We've still got about 10 minutes until kind of the end of the workshop. So if people do want to start sharing their work or talking about their work, I'm very happy if I put my own camera on to show you my disgusting chair.
Are you going to be brave and go first?
So I don't know if you can see that. I can't actually see myself now.
Oh, cool.
So I had, what was it? My emotion was love. It's a home. It had to have 5 seats and 2 legs and have a back and arms. So I kind of went, for some reason, the famous Botticelli painting popped into my head, and I drew what looks like a giant velvet clam. And I feel
Excellent.
like it would be in some awful bachelor pad type situation. Yeah, so quite cringy and horrible.
Fantastic. It sounds, yeah, well, it depends what you'd make it out of, really. I mean, it would look really quite horrendous if that was, I don't know, how did you imagine it? Like a velour or something?
Yeah, absolutely velvet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, some crushed purple velvet, that would look quite hideous.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm quite impressed with it and how disgusting it is. So if anybody else would like to share their work, that would be great. So you can either let me know in the chat, and then I can turn on your video. But if you're still kind of squirreling away with your drawing, that's also fine.
Whilst we're just waiting for everybody to finish up, this is my rather weird looking love chair. It's what was the criteria? It was 4 seats, 1 leg. It's got arms and a back, and I'm not really sure what's going on. Everybody's looking out in separate directions, which isn't really very lovely. I suppose this is where I should make the second iteration, maybe, and find some way where we can actually get people looking at each other. That would be quite nice. It's looking more like public seating, which is usually less than lovely, to be honest.
So we've had one person who is happy to share, who should now be appearing on screen very shortly. So, are you there? Who are you and where are you?
Got it?
Yeah.
Got it?
Just about see you.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's confidence. So the legs are 3 legs saying the word can, and the upholstery is going to have I can all over it. It's got 2 arms, but it's backless.
Excellent.
Love that.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you. And then just to say for people, if you're having trouble seeing through the tiny thumbnail, there is that little rectangle that you can click to swap Ben's presentation with the video. So then you should be able to see people's images a lot bigger. But a couple more people, so Guy has said, let me see if I can get Guy on screen. Hi, Guy.
Yeah. So the emotion that I got was shame, and it had to be in an office. So I kind of sort of went back to the Victorian
But it says C talker.
Is that right? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we can see you.
Okay. So I sort of went back to the Victorian idea of kind of like a duncer's stool for shame. So I imagined it being sort of in the center of the office and really high.
Can you up a little bit?
Sorry?
I can't quite see your paper.
Can you see it?
Oh, yeah, brilliant. Just a little bit higher.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Oh my God, it's literally like a ladder.
So you have to climb up on it in the center of the office, and it's kind of got things on the top to make your seating a bit more uncomfortable, and it's very close to the ceiling, so your whole body posture has to change, and you have to kind of bend over and slack over. So yeah, all linking to the idea of shame.
Excellent. Where everybody can see you, that's, yeah, that's quite intimidating, actually.
That's quite terrifying. Thanks, Guy.
Fab, thank you.
And then I think we've got, is it Sarah? Let's see if I can get Sarah up.
Can you see? I'm here.
Hi, Sarah.
I did a sliding boxing chair for anger. We've just inherited one of those rowing machines, so I just imagined it a bit like that. So it was anger in the home, 2 seats, 5 legs, but I copped out a bit on that. No back and arms. So the arms are boxing.
I literally got boxing gloves on them.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Not a very good drawing, but there you go.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Sarah.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic.
So I think that everyone who wanted to share, but if you have kind of just finished off in the last few minutes and would like to share, just let us know in the chat and we can bring you up. But otherwise, maybe Ben, you could start your kind of summary.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very much a kind of small snapshot of the kind of things that we do in the studio. I mean, yeah, we do like to have a bit of fun. I won't lie to you, interior design is quite a demanding subject. It kind of requires a real kind of passion for what you do. And I think when we're looking specifically at applicants' portfolios and things, we're looking for kind of any experience in kind of traditional drawing and making techniques. So anything really where students are kind of expressing themselves. So can be painting, can be sculpture, can be photography. We love to see any kind of physical artifacts. I know that's not always easy, especially with sort of distance interviews. I'm a real sucker for sketchbooks and things like that. So we're always looking for applicants that have a real kind of drive and passion for what they do. I think any kind of creative industry really isn't just a kind of 9-to-5 job. It's more of a lifestyle, and you have to kind of really immerse yourself in it. The slideshow that I've just left on the screen for the time being is just an example of the kind of other things that we do in the studio and the workshops in this case. And I'd like to think that the students have fun whilst they're doing it. So anything that you can do to make that learning experience more engaging and more enjoyable is hopefully a more rewarding and a deeper experience for the students. We do like to try and get out, like I said. So any kind of first-hand lived experience that you can get is the most important thing. Have we got enough time? Can I go through the course structure very quickly, Liv? Have we got a few minutes left?
I think you can absolutely go through it, and then we can just say to people, if you do need to leave, that's absolutely fine. As I've said, we'll be recording this. So if you're interested in the course structure, you can remain on, or you'll receive it in the recording as well.
Okay, fantastic. So, well, yeah, thank you for everybody that has attended today. I mean, it has been a ridiculously brief session. Normally we would be doing these sort of things over at least half a day. There'd be a lot more kind of interactive elements. There'd be a lot more kind of testing and proving of the kind of theories that we've looked at. if anybody is interested, please, do reach out to the marketing team, or you can reach myself at b.salter@nua.ac.uk. And I'm more than happy to, if it's safe to do so, come along or try and figure out a way to do another kind of interactive session. There are a couple of other workshops that we run, depending on the kind of the level or the kind of ability of the students or the access to facilities and that sort of thing. Some of them are very simple drawing exercises, and some of them are, like I said, full-blown kind of making exercises. But really what we want to try and do is, is show that, what we do is hopefully a very enjoyable process, that there are, some really amazing jobs and career opportunities for students out there with a degree in interiors. And hopefully you can really enjoy that process of learning and building that career. I won't dwell on it too long, but if anybody is interested in the kind of course structure, it's for the undergraduate program, it's obviously spread across 3 years, and those 3 years are kind of broken down into 6 units. So the first year is quite diagnostic. We try lots of different processes, lots of different design development techniques. The second year is a lot more negotiated, with a lot more live projects. And then the third year really is about building that kind of signature project and formulating that really concise portfolio. So the first unit, creative learning, is a lot of traditional processes, a lot of the drawing, model making and kind of studio practices. We look at exhibition design because that's a great way to kind of imbue a kind of really high impact, if you like, kind of emotional response to a space. And then in the second unit, we look at other things like retail design and residential design, office and workplace design and hospitality. And those are all underpinned with the kind of industry expectations in terms of skills and processes. The second year starts off with 2 short, sharp projects around really important kind of design context, if you like. And then we lead on to a much bigger kind of negotiated project. And that's really when the students start to build their kind of bespoke portfolio content. The second unit in the second year, which is actually probably one of my favorites, is a collaboration unit where we run a lot of live projects, and we work interdisciplinary. So we work with other courses, other students from other parts of the university. And then the third year really is about a much more in-depth and a much more kind of self-realized project, and that goes through all the kind of standard stages that you would be expected to work in industry through. Underpinning all of those actual practical project work briefs are the kind of contextual themes. So we introduce you to the kind of wider context, including the kind of history and the kind of social and economic impacts of interiors. We look at things like professional preparation in the second year. So that's not just formulating your identity as a designer and your portfolio, but actually preparing you for things like interviews and work placements. And then the things like the research report, are essentially the dissertation, are the chance to really get under the skin of where you see your kind of area of interest and your specific career pathway taking you. So the first year looks something like that in terms of the projects that we're doing. So like I said, the studio is really the kind of fundamentals. It's lots of sketching, lots of drawing, lots of drafting. And the second part really is how you're starting to apply all those skills. And then we work through the kind of the 4 really key areas of interiors. So retail and branding you will see featured a lot in interior design undergraduate studies because it's a great marriage of concepts and space and meaning. Residential design, which is where we use a lot of user experience processes to get under the skin of what people actually want and need. And then the workplace design is actually designing an interior design practice, an actual interior office. So that starts to introduce students to the ways that they'd be expected to work in industry, the hierarchy and structure of a practice, that sort of thing. And then one of the more fun ones, hospitality, which is restaurants, bars, that sort of thing. And that's really about creating a memorable user experience, about, building memories, which is, a really important part of how we interact with space. So hopefully that gives you, a brief kind of overview, specifically of the first year. In the open day presentations, I do go through the other years in a bit more detail. But probably the best thing that you can do to figure out or to get a bit of insight into the course is to have a look at the Instagram page. There's regular student takeovers. Unfortunately, there hasn't been as many posts recently, obviously due to the current situation, but that will give you a real kind of insight into things like a normal working week, including all the great stuff from our team of dedicated and specialist tutors, guest speakers, our industry partners, that sort of thing. Okay, cool. So I think we have got maybe a couple of minutes left. If anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask immediately, please do feel free to pop them in the chat. Otherwise, yeah, I hopefully look forward to hearing from you soon.
We had one question very early on from Sarah about what is a soft model as opposed to just a normal model.
A soft model is the kind of term that we use for kind of making sketch models and concept pieces in a studio. So that you can see here, students in the 3D workshop. You can see that slide, yeah. So these aren't design solutions. These are the kind of concept pieces that we use as a kind of jump off point. So today we've only had the chance, we only had the time to do very quick sketches, working with line to kind of imply form, but primarily what we want students to do is to feel comfortable realizing their ideas in 3D. So there's lots of making going on. So yes, soft modeling might be foam board and card. It might be working with found objects, or in this case, it might be using the vacuum former in a slightly unconventional way. But it's it's part of that kind of ideation process. Whereas something like a scale model or an exhibition model, you would consider to be a hard model rather than soft in that sense.
Great, thank you. And then Rachel has asked what the difference is between interior design and interior architecture.
Well, if you come to Boardman House and you see the facilities, you'd probably be asking yourself that question. I think it's a question of scale for the most part. Architecture and urban planning tend to deal with very large scale spaces, very large scale objects and buildings. We generally work within a building envelope, so we're interested in interior spaces. Although having said that, quite a few of our students in the past have wanted to look at exterior spaces as well, and we would never stop them exploring that. You'll see, hopefully very soon when the graduate showcase goes online, a really wonderful piece from trying to remember her name, a lady called Isabella Isleworth, which is a series of pavilions around well-being in urban centres. So I guess really the answer is, primarily scale. We speak the same language, we use the same tools, the same techniques, and for the most part, very similar processes. But it's the scale of the projects that we're working on. Interiors is much more human-centered, I'd say. And in that way, I'd like to think it's a very accessible form of art because you have to experience it, you have to interact with it on a kind of personal level.
Great, thanks, Ben. I don't think we've had any other questions, but there's still a few minutes if you want to pop those in and we can get those answered. But otherwise, we'd just like to say thank you for joining us, and hopefully I'll be seeing more of you all for the other workshops. There's still time to book if you wanted to do so, so head over to the website if you haven't as yet. But again, thank you for joining us, and we hope this was helpful for you today.
Thank you everybody.
And then someone has just asked for the email address, so I'll just pop that in the chat again for you.
I look forward to seeing the fruits of everybody's labour today.
Yeah, I really hope that people do send their chairs. I'd like to see more.
Yeah, and if anybody's interested in any other kind of workshop activities and events, that sort of thing, please do reach out to the recruitment team.
Great, thanks everyone. So I think we'll leave it there for today, but thank you again. Bye.
Cheers.